so part two is really centered around the C-suite and digital transformation, as I just mentioned, and kind of what do I see out ahead in terms of new risks, especially in this new digital landscape that we're facing. The first thing I'll start with is just sort of a big picture view of the world. A gentleman by the name of Klaus Schwab, who is, I think he's an 80-year-old founder of the World Economic Forum, which is an incredible think tank. He wrote a book several years back called The Fourth Industrial Revolution. And it was his observation that we've come through first, second, and third industrial revolutions, and we're now facing an unprecedented amount of change in this fourth industrial revolution. It's really around exponential change where physical, digital, and biological systems are accelerating change at a pace we've never seen before. And so that's just the backdrop, and that's creating challenges and pressures in and of itself on cybersecurity and risk. But that's the backdrop on that front. And I think businesses continue to face major market forces, hyper-focused on customer with social media and mobile. Customers now have more influence over brand and expectations than they've ever had. Cloud adoption used to be something we talk about in IT circles, but now there are viable solutions in the cloud, both for business applications as well as cyber. I put a lot of our assets on cloud platforms and with partners driving them, including using Manhattan Associates, for example, as our distribution platform, all software as a service. And that there are definitely consequences to that. IoT, I talked about earlier, big data, machine learning, artificial intelligence. Those are very real now, not just buzzwords. And then in cyber now, it's just infiltrated every aspect of what we do, and COVID-19 has really put pressure on that front. So these market forces have been there for some time now, 5 years now, but they're really starting to take root and really influencing how people think strategically about how their businesses operate. I think there's some consequences to these changes. We are seeing jobs being eliminated through automation. There's no doubt about that. And I think we'll continue to see that. I think you'll see some new roles emerge, cybersecurity being one of them. I'm starting to see more C-suite executives ask questions and become more savvy around technology, and they're thinking about how can IT become a strategic partner in the business, and how can it drive value and engagement with customers. So we're starting to see that happen more. And then we're starting to see, because of the cloud, some skill sets within IT are starting to shrink, and I'll give you a picture of that. One attendee asked, cyber roles change, what does the future look like? I'm going to talk about that in a minute in some of these slides. But when you think about these three major impacts, and I talk about, and I get some pushback from some CIOs, but if you think about the old world that I came from after 40 some years, in the old days, everything that I supported and managed, from business applications to infrastructure, all ran in a data center on premise somewhere, or a co-location. And I had to staff for everything from top to bottom, from applications to data, to databases, to servers, to do everything on my own. And then with the advent of cloud, we started to see solution providers bring infrastructure as a service, where you can put your own servers in, say, Microsoft, Google, or Amazon. And all of a sudden, you don't need to necessarily have systems administrators managing that platform. At SnapAV, I had a lot of platform as a service and software as a service. So platform as a service is a good example, where I hired a third party to manage the digital commerce platform. We did all the custom development and I managed all the data, but they did everything else. All the care and feeding for the servers, making sure they were up, making sure that they did disaster recovery testing, backing them up, did all that heavy lifting. And then I mentioned an example of software as a service with Manhattan Associates, but you could certainly look at Microsoft as a simple example, as well as Salesforce.com and many other platforms that are available out there as software as a service. So you can see What I'm trying to show here is that this has definitely had an impact on IT. Um, Board level communication is another question I'm getting here. What does the board care about? Which is the most effective way? I've got an example of that. I'm sounding like a broken record, but I anticipated that question. And I think it's a really good question. And I've got some statistics around what's happening in boards and at companies around risk and cyber. It's pretty fascinating, actually. I wanted to just touch on one other philosophy that I see evolving. It used to be when I was earlier in my career that we used this design, build, run model in IT, and I think it's changed, and it's much more relationship based today. And now I would say the next gen IT organization needs to be more collaborative. We need to think more about integration since there's all these cloud solutions, and now our responsibilities around orchestrating all of that become critically important. So on the collaborate side, of course, it's understanding customers and bringing in strategic partners that all drive business value. And since the cloud's real and we're able to leverage those platforms now, it's how do we integrate them to make them feel seamless? How do you pull data out of them? How do you manage, proprietary software development when you're in the cloud? Those are all skill sets that we're having to grow inside IT in this next gen world. And then on the orchestrate side, you still have to deliver value. So that's optimizing business value. That's what I mean by that. And we're still responsible for ensuring performance. Even though we're outsourcing solutions, you still aren't off the hook as an IT professional. It just puts a lot of pressure on IT to make sure that their partners are the right ones and that they're performing. And then, of course, protecting assets. We've been talking about cybersecurity and risk a bunch. I'm going to shift gears now and talk about a major challenge that I think is facing the global community that we live in, and that's this crisis of trust. We don't trust companies these days. We don't trust the media, politicians, even police now seem to be under fire. And those are opportunities for cybersecurity, cyber criminals to kind of pounce on companies. And I am starting to hear boards talk about this and ask questions about it. I had an opportunity at one of the firms that I'm talking to or working with. I actually was asked by their CEO to spend time with him every couple of weeks. And we're talking about this as a topic and talking about the role of the C-suite and how to help organizations deal with the challenges that are in front of us. But I wanted to mention this. While I may sound a little doom and gloom here, there are some positive things out there in the marketplace that I think are worth talking about. I mentioned Charles Schwab. That's a different Schwab. Klaus Schwab from the World Economic Forum. This guy is so fascinating and innovative. He's really got his finger on the pulse of what's happening around the globe. And with this fourth industrial revolution movement, he really is making a point about this is really around people. Technology isn't for technology's sake. It's for people and to make lives better. And that's the thrust. They just had their World Economic Forum meeting in Davos, Switzerland, several months back before the pandemic, and they rewrote the definition of the purpose of a business. And it was really around people, people-centered, and thinking of them as stakeholders in your business, and that includes the communities you serve. There's a group called the Business Roundtable that's chaired by Jamie Dimon, who's the CEO of Chase, JP Morgan Chase, and he's basically making a point that major employers are investing in their workers and communities because they know that's the only way they're going to survive long term. And last year they rewrote the purpose of a business, and surprisingly, making money wasn't the first on their list. It was about communities and people and stakeholders, similar to the World Economic Forum. And then I'm a big fan of John Mackey, who is the CEO at Whole Foods, who started an incredible movement, or at least raised our consciousness about people, purpose, and planet with his book several years ago called Conscious Capitalism. Here's his quote. He says, "Conscious businesses satisfy the needs of major stakeholders with profit as a consequence, not the primary obsession of the business." And he just came out with a second book last week. It just hit the market, called Conscious Leadership, which I'm halfway through, definitely worth the read. Then I mentioned I'm board chair of the Business Relationship Management Institute, and we're capitalizing on this movement, and we're talking about trusted relationships shaping and providing the fuel to drive purpose in companies. So at the end of the day, it's about people, it's about relationships, both inside the company, outside the company, in your communities, as well with your stakeholders. So it's a really kind of an interesting and refreshed look at the marketplace. I'm hopeful that it's sustainable and lasts a long time. If we had more time today, I'd talk more about my philosophies and thoughts around this, but I think it's an important influence. So let's talk about risk and how companies are sort of dealing with it. I found a really interesting report from the American Institute of CPAs, which is based in Raleigh, North Carolina, and that's the think tank for the CPA community, the Certified Public Accounting community. And they just did a report here several months ago, and what they found is that executives are saying that 58% of the time they're saying that they're getting a lot more pressure to focus on delivering information around risk in business. That's especially true. That was pre-COVID. I think that number is considerably higher now. Even before COVID, boards were asking for more oversight. 66% were asking, we need to hear more about it. Those trends I talked about at the very beginning of today's talk are really the reason for that. I think a lot of boards are curious to know what's happening, and I found that I would find board members who were curious about risk, and I'd find time to have one-on-ones with them to talk about what their interests are. Many of them, by the way, are very fearful to admit that they have a lack of knowledge, or if they do have a lack of knowledge, they're not willing to ask necessarily for help. So I try to make it safe for those folks to really ask questions and learn. And then here's the number that, despite all that we just talked about, only 30% of companies are spending time on enterprise risk management programs. So that hasn't changed since 2014. That number stays roughly where it is. And then very quickly, not many organizations see risk as adding strategic value. Most boards delegate oversight to risk. So in one sense, they're interested in it. In the other hand, they have kind of a hands-off view of it. And there are very few companies who put risk in their compensation plan. So we still have a long way to go inside organizations. And someone asked a question about how I communicated with board, whether they're interested in seeing. And I actually used BitSight. Our private equity firm introduced us to BitSight when I was at SnapAV many years ago. And I love the platform because it's very digestible. And I used the BitSight reporting engine to show progress. I'd show them our overall score. And the way BitSight works is it looks at a ton of different aspects of your business, all external IP-based, and it can give you a score. It tells you how you rank, compared to other companies. And you can actually compare yourself from one company to another. We've actually benchmarked. So this was a really interesting way for me to convey to them kind of the health of our business, especially over time, if it fluctuates up or down. It also gave us insight, and you can see an example of a scorecard that was comparing firms from one to another. The first column was the firm that I was working for, and the rest were competitors. So it kind of gave you a sense for how we were performing, and then what areas were we weakened, and what were we doing about those, and then trends over time. So this was really useful in providing the C-suite and the board with quantifiable, externally measured information that they could rely on, and it wasn't something homegrown inside the organization. It was done by a third party, and that really was a big plus in terms of how they viewed our profile and how they viewed our enterprise risk capabilities. And one of the things that I've seen done, and this is how roles are changing in many organizations, we talk about shadow IT, and we talk about IT showing up. Cloud has given rise to the opportunity for business units to go, use their credit card and buy a cloud-based platform. And so one of the models that I've been proponent of is where you've got a partner in the enterprise risk management fund. Typically, that's a chief risk officer, or in some cases now chief privacy officer, but you work with them on creating kind of a risk tolerance, and you build macro level company risks risk policies and guardrails, and you communicate and share those across the organization. That works in combination with the cybersecurity team, or we're building cyber policies, a body of knowledge, tools, methods. We're doing the cyber awareness, all of that. Those two things need to work in concert. And then what you have to do is get business units to take seriously all of this. And so where I've seen it work really well is where you've got the top leadership organizations that are really saying this is not an option. You've really got to drive home this notion that we are going to be an enterprise risk-based company, and we're going to have cyber programs that you're going to have to care about. And they start to measure business unit compatibility and compliance with both enterprise risk and cybersecurity. So this model of it all working together in teamwork is crucial, and it can't happen with one silo within the organization trying to manage it. So this is an oversimplified model, but it's a model that I've actually leveraged and helped companies see that everyone plays a role. And if you're wondering what enterprise risk management programs can look like, I do have some sample charters. If anyone's interested, let Mike know, and I can make the charter itself available. But it starts with identifying an owner. It's got to be the chief risk officer or chief privacy officer or chief compliance officer in the company. And then you've got to have skin in the game. So you've got to get the rest of the organization to adopt this principle, and you got to meet regularly and talk about risk. And this is part of digital transformation. This is part of the education that we have to do, is to explain why this stuff's important. I think one drip and then another. GDPR certainly hit the marketplace in 2018 with a thud. People are scrambling, especially if you have international business, to try to comply. California Consumer Privacy Act became active in January. My whole point here is we're going to start to see other states like Nevada, Washington, Texas, New York have all announced their own programs. So I see this entire map turning yellow. I think we'll start to see privacy and the implications for it become much more prevalent across the United States for sure. I talked about the cybersecurity maturity model certification program from the DoD. I just want to give you a real quick overview of what that is. It started in 2019 with an idea that they needed to get better in terms of filling the known gaps in the National Institute of Standards, the NIST Framework as it's referred to. And this program launched in January. It's not fully implemented yet. But what's interesting about it is it features third-party assessment. So if you're going to do work for the Department of Defense, you have to have a third party come in and evaluate whether or not you comply with the CMMC standards. They're also trying to make it cost-effective. Doesn't mean you have to be, the top of the heap when it comes to meeting these goals. There's 5 levels of maturity, but they're trying to make it effective for small providers to play in the space. They looked at models from all over the world and tried to identify where the key gaps were, and that's how they built the model. Here's the quick timeline. I won't bore you with all the gory details. The key is it's launched. They've got third-party assessors now that are being trained. RFPs are supposed to be released this month. I don't know if they have. I haven't had a chance to follow up. And then they want full implementation by 2026. And the reason I bring this up is that while yes, it's a Department of Defense standard, I see the private sector adopting it in droves, and partly because subcontractors are going to have to comply, and those are private companies oftentimes, but the framework is much more complete than the NIST framework. Instead of 14 domains, there's 17, so 3 more domains, and then they've got this maturity model. If you're going to be a level 3 CMMC, there's 110 controls in NIST. There are 20 new controls that come along for the ride. If you're going to be a level 3 CMMC certified provider, those 20 controls are critical. And these are some of the gaps that they filled. I won't go through these in detail, but we'll make this PowerPoint available to you should you want to review it. But the 20 controls are interesting in that you'd be surprised that NIST didn't cover some of these things, like spam protection, impersonation protection, number 9, implement email forgery protections, sandboxing, performance or comprehensive resiliency testing. So it's surprising that the NIST framework didn't really cover these. There aren't many of these that I wouldn't want to have in my environment. So that's why I think many organizations are going to adopt the CMMC standard, especially adopt at least these 10 controls as part of their cybersecurity framework. So we're right at the top of the hour. I thought I'd open it up for some discussion. I threw 6 of them out there. These certainly aren't the only 6. We can talk about whatever you'd like, but I hope you got some valuable information out of today's presentation. I really appreciate BitSight and Mike asking me to come and speak to you today. It was a lot of fun, and look forward to further collaboration with all of you.
Thank you, Joe. Appreciate that. I think that on that last slide, specifically, testing the backups, just being an infrastructure for over the number of years, right? It can be tough to test that out too. Again, just all the things that have to go into testing backups. You just don't know, you don't know, right? And yeah, it's but certainly it's necessary, right? And I think you said there's what you said 17. So if you need to tackle one a month, I mean, it's tough for some of these contractors in that DoD space, but I definitely could see it trickling down. What do you showed that map, right? That has a couple of the states that are in yellow. I've got some clients who are in healthcare, right? And, all the HIPAA laws, and we got clients that, PCI compliance. But, they have all these compliances, but then again, are they finding people? In California, I guess if they're the poster child, yeah, I've got to comply, but what's the risk there? So what are you seeing with these states? How are they kind of forcing people to be compliant?
I think I've asked that question of legal experts, and their response is it's going to be enforced in the courts. So I think people are beginning to pay attention to the cybersecurity parameters, the risk parameters for CCPA in all the various states. They're all looking at each other, and I think comparing notes. And I think a lot of the answer to your question will play out in the courts the same way that GDPR is. But I think at the end of the day, there's no national standard when it comes to these things, and maybe that's the direction we need to be going. I think to me it feels like the NIST framework needed a little sprucing up, and I think CMMC as it evolves will maybe become a platform that we could point to. And if you make yourself compliant with at least a level 3 standard, there's a good chance you're going to meet most of the CCPA California requirements and the other states as they come online. That's the hard part is I've seen some super complicated matrices in one company that I work for as a consultant, and they've laid out their policies, and they've identified not only do they have CMMC and NIST to worry about, but they've got a whole bunch of other government frameworks that they've got to pay attention to, including HIPAA, and they've identified which of their policies match up with which of the frameworks. It's getting so complicated and confusing for companies to respond to. And hopefully, maybe CMMC becomes a target-rich platform that we can all sort of aspire to, that sort of covers the gamut of the things we need to care about.
Yeah, I think the Spreadsheet Warrior days, unfortunately, are it's too complex. Talking with our CISA roundtable, all the different protocols in every different state when you have physical facilities, right? I mean, changing by the day, kind of incorporate that with privacy and data, right? If every state has their own law, there's no way you're going to be able to do it on a spreadsheet, right? You got to have some sort of automation, subscribe to some sort of tool, some sort of platform that's going to keep you compliant. Because, again, that employee leaves, what happens to that spreadsheet? The knowledge is kind of out the door. Because what we were also seeing too, and you were seeing it, Joe, but pre-COVID, I mean, folks were in seats in cyber for a year and a half, too, and then boom, they were leaving because it was pretty competitive, and where are you seeing those roles going forward, right? I mean, you talked about automation. There's got to be a balance between tools and staff. Yeah. Where is that going?
Well, I think vendor management, vendor partnership skill sets are coming into into view in the cyberspace. I'm working with a client that is outsourcing their SOC, and that doesn't mean that they don't have cybersecurity resources on point. You still own the policies, you still own cyber awareness, you still own incident response. You might leverage those partners in that process, but it's changing the way you look at those sorts of things and putting more pressure on identifying roles and responsibilities. So, I hate to say it, but RACI diagrams seem to be a popular topic again among cybersecurity teams that are, outsourcing these key components as a defensive posture. As soon as someone gets attacked and you identify a vulnerability in your arsenal, what happens invariably is you get questions and appropriately, you get questions from the C-suite of the board, and like, how'd this happen? How can you prevent it from happening again? And then you start thinking, well, I can hire people to do this, or I can go find a partner to help me. And that's usually the recommendation that I push people towards, which means you've really got to think about how do you partner, what roles do they have, and how do you play that role every day operationally in your organization.
And the other thing too, like if you could touch upon is, in your career, there's downturns, right? You never know where they are, but these economic changes happen. Cyber, from my perspective, and just from talking to folks and just being there, right, when clients are looking at projects and sometimes budget hasn't been approved, maybe there's some frustrations on their side of saying, hey, I know we're at risk. However, the folks that are signing the checks don't see it that way. So, we know if you go on the highway, you got to have a seatbelt. It's really good to have an airbag, but some people don't want the airbag until they've been in an accident. So, during these economic times, right? Budgets are tight. There's a lot of unknowns. Like, what are those conversations? What do you see? How do you have those conversations, right? We know you need them, but are you sunsetting other tools? Obviously our friends here at BitSight, you've used them. What do you see? How do you, the budget thing is always a tough thing at the end of the day, right?
Well, I think it's a communication, and one of the questions from our attendees is what's the one thing we can do tomorrow to make tomorrow safer for our organizations, and it's the word that comes to mind is communicate, and a second word would be share. And I think from my point of view, what I've been trying to do is communicate and share the realities of the world we live in with the C-suite and make them understand that it is not okay to say that they don't understand cyber or technology. That's not an okay thing to say in today's world. I think COVID-19 has helped that along considerably, but I still think there's room for improvement. My biggest worry is that once we're through this pandemic and things return to whatever the new normal is, that people sort of relax about risk in cyber. And I saw that happen in 2001 when we were sort of through the September 11th event. New York was a friendly place for about 6 months, and then it kind of went back to normal. We sprung back to the normal, and I'm worried that if we're not careful, that we may relax a little bit. I'm hoping I'm wrong about that, but I think, to me, Mike, it's communication and sharing, and not being afraid to talk about real issues. It is the C-suite's responsibility. And I think I wouldn't be surprised to see legislation change over time, where organizations are held to task if they don't have the right controls in place. In fact, the SEC reprimanded a major bank 2 weeks ago, forcing the CEO to resign because they were warned about their cybersecurity programs, and they got frustrated, and at the end of the day, they fined them, and it forced the CEO to resign. So that sort of thing, I think, will begin to happen more often. And when it does, then executives and boards are going to start taking it a lot more seriously than they do.
Yeah, I mean, again, the CMC, and again, it's not super publicized out there for strategic reasons, right? The DoD, but from my sources of folks that are experts, right? Just seeing that the military has now 5 domains. They added space, but before they added space this year, they added cyber. So if the military is adding cyber, right? If you look at where all the money is going to, how's this being funded? It's not just the bad guys. It's the nation states, right? The nation states it's their military. It's how they're
Right.
getting an advantage out there. This is real big money. This is billions of dollars of folks who, have the keys to the castle, right? That are funding everything that goes downstream, right? I mean,
Yeah, it's a good point, Mike, and that actually brings up one other point. I've actually seen the I won't name which part of the federal government this is, but they're actually using BitSight to evaluate third-party relationships that they're engaged with. So they're looking at how's this company that I want to do business with performing, and you can use BitSight to sort of evaluate that. It's all public IP. It's not they're not reaching into your firewalls and stealing proprietary information, but they're looking at your performance as a third party and fourth party provider, and they're trying to understand who they're doing business with. And I see that happening more and more and more, and that's an innovative way to use the BitSight platform that I hadn't even thought of until I got to this organization. And the one of these divisions, I was on a call with a CISO from one of these divisions, and they were asking very specific questions about this company's stance on a particular issue. And I was wondering how in God's name did they figure out that we had a known issue? How did they know about it? Because we didn't publicize it and it hadn't reached the level of an event. But they were certainly aware of it, and it turned out that they were using BitSight and could see what we could see.
Yeah, it's as I've gotten more into cyber with the cyber buyer, right? Just the things that our friends do at BitSight. It's the people that are using it, it's pretty intelligent, right? The third party risk, and then we ran into a company that has franchises, right? And they're like, how do we keep an eye on our franchisees, because we can't really tell them, again, like patching, and there's a whole bunch of other different stuff there, but they can say something and they could maybe prove it on paper, but how do I really kind of have that? Which I thought was really clever on how they were looking to use BitSight into making sure that their franchisees are doing what they say they do, to make sure, because if that brand gets infiltrated internationally, it's going to come downstream, and guess what, at the end of the day it comes to the CEO, right, and the C-suite.
Yeah.
So
it's also a great tool for shadow IT. So if you've got business units standing up sites and doing things out in the public, without you asking for permission, you can point BitSight at that engine and take a look at the risk profile of that platform. And it's a way that you can do that without being intrusive. It's just I think tools like BitSight, I'm sure they've got competitors, but no one that I've seen that holds a candle to the platform. But I see it as a tool that'll find new uses in organizations over time. It goes back to that, finding the right partner, and you can't do the heavy lifting on your own. You gotta find trusted partners that can help you row that boat.
with that, any other last questions before we wrap up today's webinar? Well, before that, Joe, how do people get a hold of you? If folks want to get a hold of you, I know, I think you said you might be penning a new book. I don't want to put you on the spot in regards to due dates, but what's coming up for you here the end of this year, beginning of next year?
Still writing. Hopefully the book will be out sometime mid next year. Right now, I don't have an official title, but I've been calling it Demystifying IT. I'm talking about some of what we talked about here today and more. And then you can find me on LinkedIn or joe@ciomentor.com.